to our viewers on Facebook. I'm Bianca Noblo, and I'm here with Ian Dale and Bonnie Greer. And we're about to kick off a discussion on free speech and political correctness, things I feel like you're going to be very passionate about, both of you.
Are we? I mean, it's just so exciting.
We don't give a damn.
Right, exactly, to be honest with you. And that's free speech, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Right? I would like to find out who created the term political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
See, I've been trying for the last 30 years to find out who did that, because it's not anybody on the left, and I'm not sure it's anybody on the right. Who did that, and what does it mean? I don't even know what it means.
I suppose, I mean, some people would say, I know we had a discussion with, we discussed something similar and talked a few minutes ago, and Aisha Hazarika said that it effectively means just being polite. Mm-hmm. And there is an element of that, but in a sense, I think it's gone too far when people feel that they're inhibited from saying something because it might cause offence. Well, we don't have a law on offence. We have a law on hate crimes in the United Kingdom, but I should still be able to offend Bonnie, and I'm sure I do very often.
Yes.
And she should be able to be offended without thinking, oh, I'm going to take him to court for that.
Exactly. And this is where we agree. I think, hey, Andrew.
Nice to meet you.
I think I don't know what it means anymore. I'm a professor at a university, and you know, at a university, you have to be extremely careful. And I respect those parameters because, you know, we're there to educate people. So I respect it. But you learn new things every day about, you know, you can't address a person a certain way. And you have to be very careful.
But it's interesting that you say, I'm a professor in a university and I have to be really careful what I say. A university ought to be the home of free speech, where you shouldn't have to be careful what you say. I mean, OK, we all know there are limits to free speech. I'm not going to sit here for the next half an hour and say there should be no limits to free speech. We all, I think, understand what those limits are. If you say something really hateful about somebody's racial background or sexuality or whatever, yeah, that is unacceptable. But if you criticise a politician in some way, on the left or right, that should not be banned in universities.
I agree.
And we have all this no platforming here, which I know is a slightly different subject,
No,
but it's
think
slightly
I
related.
was thinking about that too, and I think it is related and really important because universities, and specifically the younger generation, are so much more sensitive to this in the
They
UK.
very much are.
than they
You have
ever
to be
have been.
so careful.
And I'm glad that we've got
But
Bonnie.
that breeds its own weakness, though. If you keep insulating people from conflict or a harsh word, you'll never get out of that spiral. We'll always have to tread softly.
But Andrew,
and you won't be able to draw the distinction that Ian's making between things that truly do matter and a careless joke that like I've made dozens, hundreds of those vegan-type comments to colleagues and coworkers, and the horror to think of had each one of those been put into the public light.
But you do, you know, in that kind of situation, I agree with you. But in a university, for instance, or in a hospital, you have to think this environment is one where I'm there as a teacher to do a particular thing. If my not adhering to certain rules or norms doesn't allow that thing to happen, which am I going to weigh up? You know, if a student says to me or to someone, I am this, don't call me that. I mean, some people don't want to be gendered. They don't want you to say he or she. You have to do that because your job is
if I want to call that person he or she, I mean, I might know that I'm offending them. That is my decision. It's their decision if they want to be offended. But there shouldn't be any recourse to the law. They shouldn't be able to take that person to some disciplinary hearing in a university, for example, I would argue.
And my professors at university as well were always very strong on the fact that discomfort can be a good thing because it helps refine the sense of your own judgment and your argument. Yeah, but it wasn't too long ago.
No, I was going to say.
No, it was only a couple of years ago. So
she added hastily.
Yes, she added hastily. She added hastily, exactly.
Whereas when we were at university...
you could do anything you
Yeah,
wanted.
you could say anything.
You wanted.
Let's get right back into this. We've just got a few seconds. We're going to air. Hello and welcome welcome to CNN Talk. Today, we're taking a look at one of the major issues of our time, how we define the right to free speech versus the need for political correctness. We were inspired by a story making headlines right here in the UK. The editor of a major food magazine has lost his job after making comments about vegans. William Sitwell received a pitch from a freelance writer about including more vegan recipes in his magazine. He responded by suggesting vegans should be killed or force-fed meat. Sitwell has apologized, but still had to step down. Now, some say that that is deserved. Others claim he was simply joking. So we want to know what you think. Where should we draw the line between free speech and political correctness? Have your say on our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/CNNI. I think I'd like to start today by getting all of your opinions on this Sitwell story. So do you think it's right that William Sitwell lost his job over the remarks that he made?
I don't think so. I think it'd be right for Sitwell to be held up for ridicule and made an example of the insensitivity that we sometimes show to people. But to lose a job over something like this, I think it's one step
With
too
20
far.
years of association with
Yeah, and
the
I think it's one of those things that we dial everything from 0 to 100 now with no kind of intermediary steps. It's either the ultimate sanction or no sanction at all. And I think we've lost that room to maybe have a more measured response and go, that was a really silly, stupid thing to say. Let's not do that again. And let's maybe get an article in from this freelancer.
Let's get the exact words up before we come to Ian and Bonnie. So here are the comments. I'm going to pull these up. So the quote from the email is, how about a series on killing vegans one by one? Ways to trap them, expose their hypocrisy, force-feed them meat, make them eat steak and drink red wine. This is what precipitated the entire issue. Ian, your thoughts?
I covered this on my radio show on Monday. We did a phone-in on it, and it was very interesting to hear the different perspectives. But even vegans who rang in thought this was a bit over the top for him to... I mean, he hadn't lost his job at that point. He said he resigned, but let's face it, he was resigned. Big companies in these situations, when they face social media onslaughts, and I mean, there was a petition to get him sacked. 2,000 people signed, all of 2,000.
And there are meant to be 3.5 million vegans in the UK.
Big, if you say so. Big companies panic in these situations, particularly this supermarket, Waitrose, because they've just started a new line of vegan foods, and they're the first supermarket to really take this seriously. And veganism is becoming a big thing in this country. But it goes back to the old joke, how do you know someone's a vegan? Because they tell you every 15 minutes. And there is a certain religion about veganism. And because of some health issues, which I won't bore you with, I've had to adopt a little bit. I mean, I'm not a vegan, but I have had to go down that road a little bit. And I don't eat dairy, I don't eat red meat anymore, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of get where they're coming from, because they feel a need to sort of evangelize about it. And the problem is that when you do that, you put a lot of people off, because people don't want to be told, well, you've got to do this because you're saving the planet, you're saving these poor animals and all the rest of it. They react badly to it. So that there are always going to be issues around this that some people will find offensive, and other times you just have to look at it with a bit of a sense of humour. Now, he clearly didn't mean, I want to kill all vegans. I mean, if he had meant that, I'd say, yeah, absolutely, get rid of him. But he clearly didn't mean that. So we're having people taking offence at something which they shouldn't take offence at. Now, BuzzFeed, who published this story, I think they're partially responsible for this, because this same journalist pitched a story to them, not on this, but she included the text of this email. And so they just took the email and made the story out of it. So that's where I think the media has to act a little bit more responsibly too.
That's why they're called BuzzFeed.
Wow.
And let's get the words up from that very freelance journalist Ian was referring to before we get to you, Bonnie. So this is what Celine Nelson wrote. Those who defend Sitwell say it was just a joke, that, of course, he was being facetious. But that's not the point. This isn't about Sitwell or why he resigned. It's about why it's accepted or considered funny to speak to vegans with hostility and anger. Your thoughts, Bonnie?
Well, you know, there was some kind of kerfuffle in the Labour Party about something someone said about, what was it? It was absurd. I can't remember exactly, so I won't quote it. Ian's right, and saying that, but he is.
Miracles
I know it's too much.
Father
We
of
cannot be
regularity.
on here together. However, as someone who does work in a university, you know that these places where we all go, are places where we have power. These are empowered places. They're not only just about your definition, it's about where you can be in charge, where you can rule. Obviously, when you look at what he said, it looked like a joke to me, but I'm not a vegan, so maybe I didn't take it that way. So the question is, how do we get to this place? And I do think it's about power. I do think it's where people can go to actually rule from. He obviously didn't mean to wants to kill people. That's obviously not what he meant. But it is a place where you can go and you can sort of hold sway. And that's all the way down the line, really. And the question is, should we respect that? Because it is about people's space, or should we not respect it? And where's the line
I think
drawn?
if you take a look at her statement, the journalist's statement, that's a classic example for me of making a mountain out of a molehill. Like to conflate the issue and to make it about something so grand about disrespect for vegans. Like, have we lost all our common sense? When you read his statement, it's a joke. You know, and if we can't brush those off, why not go back to him and say, I didn't appreciate that rather silly, stupid joke. I'm going to go pitch your competitor, sell this story, and make you pay. You know, I think our recourse is now always like a footballer to roll around on the ground and wave and go, I've been fouled, I've been fouled.
If I want to disrespect vegans, I should be allowed to disrespect vegans. People disrespect communists, people disrespect conservatives. Why should vegans be any different?
Now, I shall tell you what the Executive Director of the Humane Society International UK has to say about
Do you
that.
have to?
I mean, I don't have to. You know, I'd quite like to at this particular moment.
What on earth is the Humane Society? I mean, for goodness sake.
I'm going to pull this up. This is from Claire Bass. So she says, under the 2010 Equalities Act, veganism is legally recognised as a protected characteristic under religion and belief. Switch vegans in his email to Muslims and he would have been sacked and arrested. Vegans have rights to their diets and beliefs without hate.
No, I don't think that's true.
A lie.
I'm not sure that's true. And see, this is the next point I wanted to make.
It is true, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, this is the next point I wanted to make. When something really horrible happens, when people are racially abused, religiously abused, how do we weigh up what's serious and what's, you know, how do we do that? Again, I respect vegans, I do, and I absolutely do. But I'm interested in how do we weigh up a real offense like racial slurs, expletives, and those poor people who died in that synagogue. The last thing they heard was a racial slur. So how do we kind of make that dividing line if almost everything is bad?
There is an interesting ethical angle here, because when we have discussions on the whole Me Too subject, we always say, well, if you feel that you were sexually harassed, you were. We say to people who were stalked, if you feel stalked, and I've had this